Hey guys, it's Matt from Worship-Based Tutorials. Today, let's look at the best ways to utilize your Microsynth in praise and worship. First, let's go ahead and build our tone on the pedal. Okay, let's go ahead and start with all of our sliders turned all the way down to 0. Then we'll take our sub-octave and turn it about halfway up. We'll take our guitar tone and turn it about 75% of the way up, and take our octave and also go about halfway up. What that's going to do is that's going to set our guitar volume to about 75%. The sub-octave is going to be at about 50%, and the octave, which is the octave above, is going to be about 50% as well. Okay, so before we turn it on, it sounds kind of like this. This is just the bass. And after we engage it, okay, and now what we want is we want to get a little bit of that grunge, a little bit of that square wave in there. So what we're going to do is start to turn up the square wave. But when the start and stop frequency knobs are all the way down, it's going to sound really dark. So as we add this in, it almost doesn't do anything. So what we're going to do to change that is we're going to turn up the frequencies. So let's take the start and the stop frequency and turn those up. There we go. That's starting to sound a lot better. Okay, and those are pretty much the only sliders you really need to worry about. Again, the sub-octave is going to be playing an octave below your bass guitar. The guitar is actually just your bass volume. The octave is going to be one octave above it. And the square wave is going to be the actual synthesizer sound wave that's coming out of the pedal. And lastly, let's talk about the trigger slider. The trigger slider is basically raising or lowering the threshold of volume that it takes to make the synth note come out. Now that we have our tone built, let's go over a few of the tips and tricks that'll help you get the most out of your pedal. So since the Microsynth can only play one synth note at a time, if it hears more than one note or multiple sounds or just weird artifacts coming from your bass, it's going to kind of freak out a little bit. What that means is we have to provide the best, cleanest signal to our Microsynth. The best way to do that is to make sure that it's first in your signal chain and that nothing else is affecting the signal before it hits the Microsynth. Feel free to route your signal to a drive after that. It actually sounds pretty good. So the next thing we're going to talk about is sustain. Because of the way the Microsynth works, it has a hard time holding a note for a very long time. Let's see what happens if we just let a note ring out. So eventually it just stops. This can be kind of problematic in worship because sometimes you need to play a note and just let it ring out. So in order to get around this, what I recommend doing is switching off your Microsynth just before you hit a note that you need to sustain. Let me show you how I do that really quick. That actually sounds a lot better than you would think in a mix. Most of the time you simply can't hear it when you disengage the Microsynth. To help cover up when you engage and disengage a Microsynth, try to time it with a snare or a kick hit. Okay, next tip. Pick a note on your bass, and when your Microsynth is engaged, don't play any lower than that note. If you play any lower than that note, it can end up just sounding super, super muddy. Let's see what that can sound like. As you can see, as the notes get lower and lower, it just sounds muddier and muddier. Those kinds of notes are only going to come out of the subwoofers at your church, and most sound guys are going to be really careful about that, and they'll probably just end up turning you down anyway. So I'd recommend picking a note and not going below it. For me, it's the A on the E string. My last playing tip for you guys is to make sure your playing style is very clean and well defined when you have it engaged. Remember, the Microsynth can only track one note at a time, and if you're playing extra notes or if there's a lot of fret noise going on, then the Microsynth's gonna have a really hard time tracking what you're doing. You can still play fills and whatnot, but don't go too fast as to make it sound muddy. If you have to move quickly from note to note, make sure the notes that are no longer important don't continue to ring out. This is really gonna mess with it. If you don't pay attention to muting unnecessary notes and have a lot of fret noise, listen to how it can sound. Now, if we try to clean that up and really make sure we're not hitting any unnecessary notes, it'll sound a lot cleaner. pay attention to your fret noise. That can also mess with the tracking and just make it sound kind of muddy. All right guys, that's it for this one. I hope these tips and tricks take your playing with the Microsynth and worship to the next level.